you, Sharon. Yeah, that's one of the, I'll return the compliment, is that raising money is not fun. When you're trying to run a business, it's about 2 full-time jobs, and then you layer raising money while you have 2 full-time jobs, and that's 2 more full-time jobs. There's a few people in the industry that I got to know really well during that process, and Sharon was one of them that I've remained friends with. She had a high level of integrity, and I really enjoyed both the ups and downs of the negotiation process. We ended up not taking venture money, so it wasn't anything against, at the time, Bank of America. But it was more of a decision, a personal decision of where I wanted to take the company. So thank you, Sharon. So with that, I thought I would use the mic because you can do things like this, as opposed to standing at the podium, and I get to move and keep your eyes moving and keep you awake. But I thought, instead of giving you a lecture on, here's the bullet points of what made me successful, in the spirit of business school, people ask what I learned in business school, and I sometimes scratch my head and go, I don't know. Because a lot of it, sure. A lot of that is, what you learn is case study. So tonight I'm going to try and just give you a true from-the-heart case study of the trials and tribulations, the highs of, being courted by the NYSE and the NASDAQ and getting to walk around their office and have everyone be really respectful to you, and then to the lows of having your e-commerce provider collapse and destroying 6 phones in less than 5 days because you're so angry. But it's that case study that I want to convey to you tonight and lead you through that. And hopefully when you ask what you learned from Paul, you'll say, I don't know. But it'll sink in, and as you relate to these events in your own experiences, hopefully you'll get some value from that. So real quickly, whoops, too fast. Big Fish Games, for those of you who don't know, we are a casual games marketplace. We match, and what does that mean? Simply that we match the world's developers of casual content, games that you buy. I'll talk about that later, a little bit of an archaic concept. You actually pay for games and you own them, and match those with the people who love to buy those games, and do that at scale. And some fun numbers. Start with big ones. We distribute a lot of games, 2 billion games since the origin of the company. We moved into mobile about 3 years ago with 110 million games in distribution so far. We have 15,000 different games in our various stores, including international stores. We have animation problems with PowerPoint, but aside from that, 700 employees across 5 global offices. There we go. 550 game developers, 400 new games released every month, fully QA'd and launched onto PC of various languages, mobile, and other platforms. 50, 13, and 5, and 3, and 1. So there you go, 1. I'll just touch on the important one there is we're the #1 PC Mac global app store for PC games, and we're extending that leadership and leveraging that core competency into creating ecosystems where we don't necessarily own the store, but we own the customer relationship in other people's stores, and extending into things like mobile and connected TVs. A little brag point, just since this is a startup discussion here. This is Seattle's GeekWire, and we've been #1 for I think 4 months straight now, maybe 5, which is a big honor being up in Seattle. Doesn't quite have the weather of Silicon Beach, but it's a great place, and there's a really vibrant startup community there as well. So let's get into the presentation. As Bambi mentioned, I started this company as a project of passion. I wasn't intending to build a company. My father was a college professor. My mother was an administrator and psychoanalyst. Go figure. So I didn't have the natural kind of role models of entrepreneurs that a lot of people say is the leading indicator of someone who's going to start a company is their parents were an entrepreneur. I call it the accidental company because I was at a aggressive company, Real Networks, and did a lot of fun, cool things and learned a lot. But it wasn't a lot of fun. I wasn't getting a lot of enjoyment out of my day-to-day, and I left there with some money after the dot-com boom and saved enough out of the bus to do something fun, and decided to do nothing. and found that sitting around and being semi-retired was really dull and not very mentally healthy. And so I got on a plane and decided I want to do what I did when I was really young, which was code games. I started when I was 11. I didn't have television because we lived about a half mile beyond the reach of cable television, much to my dismay. And so my father, as a college prof, started bringing home computers. I started programming, and I said, I really loved that when I was a kid. I've never been professionally trained as a programmer, but I launched a game service for another company. I saw those game developers. How hard could it be? So I went to Hawaii with my wife for 7 days, and much to her delight, I read about a 1,000-page programming manual and coded my first game on the flight back, and you'll see that one in just a bit. I started the company just on a whim. I incorporated because I needed to, and had a good lawyer as a wife and made sure I did everything by the books. And bootstrapped with $10,000 investment. The dot-com bust was taking its toll, and my money was all in a portfolio that was not accessible at the time because it was backing my mortgage, which wasn't a great position, but not the best way to start a company. But I really wanted to do something I enjoyed. And so I raised no money. I started the company in May of 2002 and programmed a few games and had a few successes. So I did a business plan keynote speech for the West Coast College's business plan competition, where they announced the winner, and I started by saying I started my company without a business plan, even though everyone here is to celebrate the glory of their business plans. But that business plan is just an idea. It's a theory, and you got to treat it as such. You should probably have a theory if it's not written down. You should have in your mind what it is you're passionate about and what you're doing, and then you got to start. You know, the number one reason businesses fail is they fail to get started. And that's an old saying that I've said many times, but it's really true. It's a big leap of faith to start a company. It's scary. But if you don't start, you'll never succeed. And it's not as scary and hard once you're underway and your head's down and you're just living day to day. So the other really important part about starting a business is you need to be passionate about what you're doing. They look fairly passionate. Starting a business is not a job. It's your life. It consumes all aspects of your life. If you're really starting a company from scratch, it is your life, and your life is short. 50, I'll call it, we'll look around the room, 80 years from now, we'll all be dead, everyone in this room. Life is short. So if you're going to spend 5, 10, 20 years of your life building something, you should probably like what you're doing. And if you don't like what you're doing, you're probably not going to do a very good job. And so make sure that what you're doing, it's not necessarily the product you have to be passionate about, but what you're building, what you're solving for, you need to have a passion for it because you're going to be living it for a long time. So in the early days, the game on my left is one that I had a prototype working on the plane flight back from Hawaii. I was taking two of the top-selling casual games at the time and combining their mechanics into one. It failed. But part of the joy of being an entrepreneur is having conviction and having confidence and not being afraid of failure. The game on the right was called Mahjong Towers, and it hit #1 on every casual game site. It launched the company. So I failed with my first game. It made like $3,000 over a period of 3 months. But I pivoted, and within a month after launching the game on the left, I launched the game on the right, and it made a lot of money for a one-person startup. And that $10,000 that I started with the company with, that was the only money I needed to really get going. And the other thing is that when I started, I was building almost a game a month, and the games were simpler back then, but that's a Herculean feat. I was working 20 hours a day on average near the second half of a game cycle. And that sounds horrible. But if that's what you're doing for 20 hours a day, it's not so bad. So fast forward a few years, I've been building games. 2004, I pick up my head and I said, you know, this is not a hobby. This is not just a project. The 12 people that I've hired just because there was things I hated doing and I wanted someone else to do them. The first person I hired was for customer service because I used to get depressed when customers would contact me and complain about how crappy my games were. I would actually literally get clinically depressed, and so the first person I hired was do these emails. I don't care what you say, just keep them away from me, because I have a lot of pride in what I do. I still have not raised any money. The company is doing very well. It's $3.8 million. It's an LLC. A lot of that's flowing directly into my bank account at home because it's an LLC, and that's how it works, and that was kind of a fun phenomenon. And I did kind of raise my head and said, this could be a real business. This is not a hobby. This is not a lifestyle. This could be a real company. And at the time, I saw a lot of companies making mistakes all over the industry. And so the big lesson I learned in this area was I started getting cocky, and I started thinking about all the things I could do, and then I started getting overwhelmed with the scope of how hard it was starting the one thing I was really good at. And so at that point is when I really kind of felt that the lesson that I needed to stay true to was around focus, that I needed to be better at one thing than anyone in the world. I don't need to be okay at a dozen things. I need to be really good at one thing. And I stayed pretty true to that for many years, and that really helped me succeed when a lot of the competitors in the space, it was a very hyper-competitive business in the early 2000s. There's a dozen companies, both startups and companies like MSN and Yahoo and others that were competing with me. And they were all doing a lot of other things. We were doing one thing, and we did it really well. We were really, really focused. The other big thing is conviction. You know, people ask, when I started the company, did you ever think you'd be here today? And I was like, absolutely not. You know, that part of building a company is making decisions with imperfect data. You want to get as much data as you can gather to make informed decisions, but at the end of the day, if you require perfect data to make decisions that are handicapped to be right most of the time, your company is going to be paralyzed. I made a lot of decisions where it was a flip of the coin. And so if you think about where I started and where I am today, I did a little mental calculation. And I figured I'd make about 10 big decisions a day since I started the company. The magnitude of those decisions get bigger as you get bigger, but they are very important at the stage of the company. And you multiply that by 10 years times 365 days, that's a lot of decisions. You know, that's 40,000 decisions. And you think about the tree of that decision tree matrix, the odds of me ending up here today from where I started are very, very small. I could have been Google. I could have gone bankrupt in 2005. You know, there's a lot of different decisions you make, and the only way you're certain to not be successful is to not make decisions. So you have to move forward with determination and conviction. You need to believe in what you're doing, but not be so bullheaded that you don't realize when you're wrong. I've done a lot of things wrong. My first game failed, but that didn't stop me. I continued going, and my second game was successful. I learned a lot from that first game. I could not have made that second game if it wasn't for the failure of the first game. So you have to believe in what you're doing and have the conviction to make hard decisions when you have imperfect data, which is most of the time. So 2005, we're doing well. I haven't raised any money. We're $8.6 million in revenue, and I decide that I want more money. What I'm doing requires a little bit more money now, and I want to scale it up. Data is everywhere, and I realized that for every dollar I was spending, I was very focused from day one, as Sharon mentioned, on ROI. I didn't have money when I started. If I spent $1,000, I had to be really damn sure that I was going to get more than $1,000 back, or I was moving the company backwards. And so the nice thing about that is that very discrete focus on ROI when I was a tiny company stayed true to the point where I was a multi-million-dollar company at $10 million, and that ROI was pretty bulletproof. I knew what I was doing. I knew every dollar I spent and how to spend it and how to get a return. So I went out to friends and family. And again, with friends and family, I've had friends approach me for investment. The first thing I look at them is how confident are they, and it goes back to that conviction. I was very convinced in what I was doing, and I had the data to back it, and I put on a good show. My relatives, my friends and family are not rich, so raising $1.7 million to fund my company at this stage was a heroic feat. But I didn't want to go out for professional money. I didn't really know, how I would do long term, and I wanted friendly investors early on. There's a time and a place for every type of investor, and don't want to offend people in the room. But at this point, it's still an organically growing company, and it's in a very volatile space called games that people don't give a lot of credit to at the time. So data is everywhere. I was using it, and it allowed me to raise money. It allowed me to invest that money and get a return. And you know, when you throw money at a problem and you know how it's going to return, it's a good bet. It's not a bet, it's an investment. And I had it down to a very, very narrow margin of error where I could spend money to grow. We did not have an inherently viral product. You know, we taught you, if you look at companies like Facebook or Zynga, these games are all about viral growth. I make introvert games. You know, talk about non-viral products. I make games that people like to hole up in their den and play for 10 hours straight and not talk to anyone. And then if people ask them, do you play games? This is usually a 50, 45-year-old woman. They say, no, why? So it wasn't easy to grow by virality, so I had to have a good, you know, ROI, LTV to CPA spread, where every dollar I spent, I would get more than that back. And I could throw money at the problem when I was convinced of that, and it worked well. And then I also realized that when you're analyzing the LTV, the L is important. The L makes a big difference. If you can retain a customer, the L contributes a lot more than the rest of, you know, than the early stages of acquiring a customer. When you acquire a customer, it's exceedingly expensive if you're buying customers, and we were buying customers. And with a lifetime focus, you need to be good to your customers. And to be good to your customers, you need to listen to them. You don't take what they say and blindly follow, but you understand who they are, what they want, and what they may not know they want. Sometimes if you give them exactly what they ask for, you fail. So you have to kind of read between the lines and really understand what it is that why are they enjoying your product, and how can you make it better for them. And then retain them for the long term, because it's a lot cheaper to retain a customer than it is to acquire one. So in 2006, the hangover of hypergrowth, I raised $7 million from RFOFs, new term I invented. Does anyone know what that is? Rich friends of friends. It's not friends of and family, it's rich friends of friends. So I'd been doing well by now, and the people who invested in me saw the growth, and I'm an actual natural introvert, which is odd to be speaking in front of a large audience, but I didn't go out and network. I just had friends that were impressed with what I was doing, and through word of mouth, there was others that wanted to invest, and I went out with a concerted effort and got introduced to a lot of rich friends of theirs, and raised a very large sum of $7 million as an angel round. This is still not what quote a Series A would be. And at that time, the company was doing 24 million. So I'd tripled the revenue in 2 years from what the original angels had invested in. However, when you get a bunch of money, you think you can do anything, and you can't. The one tenet I started to lose sight of was that tenet of focus. I was a big company. I was making 24 million. I can do anything. I can take on Yahoo. I can take on Google. And you can't. You need to stay focused. There's a time and a place to diversify, but unless you're number one in your market, you need to stay absolutely focused. And at this point in the evolution of the company, we were a major contender in casual games, but we were far from number one. And yet we're starting to branch out and try and do a bunch of other things. In 2006, we spent a bunch of money, and we pulled them all back. We canceled dozens of projects, and we said, let's do what we do well and continue doing it better and just do more of it, and let's take out our competitors. And let's put a strategy of how we're going to become number one. The vast majority of profits in any industry go to the number one player, so let's be number one. The thing that you learn, though, is that people aren't infinitely scalable. I was good at making decisions, but increasingly that data that says, what level of certainty do you have about this decision? You start out, you're doing everything, you're very close to the business, and you're in the 90s, eventually you drift down to the 80s. By the time you're at this scale of over 140 people, and you've got $24 million in revenue and a lot of customers and a lot of product initiatives going on, you're at best 50% right. You're a coin flip, and so you need to hire smart people and diversify your talent. So what you need to do is focus on like your company, what are you really, really good at? And then hire people for everything else. Hire really good people. And when you hire people, overhire. Hire for where you think you're going to be in 5 years. So hire really, really good people at the senior level. If they're going to be your peers and take on leading the, oops, important slide not to lose sight of. So this is my team. But I hired people that were way overqualified for the size of the company and the position I was putting them at the time, with the intent of letting them grow into their jobs. And when I hired them, I gave them the liberty to make their own decisions, because I hired them in areas that I was not best at. I knew what I was very good at, and I stayed true to that. And I hired someone that was good at data warehousing. I hired someone who's great at legal. I hired someone who's great at managing process and process operations, and I let them run. 2008, two years later, sustaining growth is the theme here. We're big now. We're $84 million in revenue, and we raised a huge venture capital round. And it was not because we needed money. It's actually much easier to raise money if you don't need it. We were very profitable at this point. We'd been profitable since day one. There's a few quarters where GAAP basis we weren't profitable because we were spending so much on marketing, but we knew it would come back and we were more profitable later on. So we didn't need money, but I had a problem. I had as an investor would call, a single stock risk. 99.95% of my net worth was in this little internet startup. And that's a problem when you're making decisions. It starts to weigh on you very heavily when you make decisions, and you start becoming risk averse. I did this round of fundraising not because I'm greedy or wanted a bunch of money. It's because I knew that it was the best thing for me to continue to lead the company. That I needed to be bullish, I needed to take big risks that could make or break the company. And when you have this basically windfall in front of you that could all go away tomorrow, you start becoming risk averse. So I raised a bunch of money, and I sold a bunch of shares in my company. I maintained control. I still had control of the majority of the shares, but I brought in a lot of good investors that actually added value on the board, a new perspective that I didn't have, and I got back to a place where I was comfortable that if it all went away, that was okay. That I'd had a good run and I made some money, and that continued that very heavy conviction and that ability to make decisions under uncertainty and to drive forward. And it got rid of that kind of that fear that I had that was growing, taking over my body at the time. So what's important here is corporate culture. You now are a big company, and while you think everyone knows what's going on in your mind, it turns out they don't. And I would occasionally have meetings and talk about what we're doing, and people would look at me with blank faces, and I realized that I needed to communicate more. I'm not a natural networker. I'm not a communicator, but I had to force that, and I had to force actually proactively enforcing what I felt the culture of our company was, so that we were all headed in the same direction, that we all valued our customers in the same way, and that we all kind of were locking arms in unison and we weren't all going in separate directions. And that's very important. There was a point in the company where there was no culture, and it wasn't because I didn't have a culture, it's because I was exhibiting it occasionally in behaviors of the people who were close to me saw, but I wasn't openly conveying it. And that's a very unnatural thing to do, but it's a very important thing to do. You have to overtly state what it is that our culture is and what our company stands for. You have to do those, what I call bullshit diagrams of here's our core values and here's what we stand for. It's not bullshit, it turns out. It turns out that that's really important because people can't read your mind, and it's really important that you get what you're thinking is your culture down on paper in a digestible format, and that you convey that continually to everyone in your company so they understand what you're doing and they can make decisions that are aligned with how you feel you can grow the company. So what's next? We won. So casual games, as defined by games that you download and buy that are not hardcore or midcore, there is only one competitor left in the market that's of any note, and that's Big Fish Games. And that was a great feat. We did that. There's a lot of strategy behind the scene. Turns out that now almost 90% of all casual games coming to market are owned or exclusively published by Big Fish Games. We did that for almost 6 years before people knew, because we wouldn't put our name on it. We just let the developers distribute it like it was their games. We actually owned them all. And one day we went to Real Networks and they said, please take your games off please take our content off your site. And we said, that's fine. We'll take your 22 games down, and by the way, the 600 games that you have on your site, they're coming down too. So, so we had very stealthily cornered the content market in casual. And that was an amazing feat. And unfortunately, we became the big fish in a medium-sized pond. Casual games, as we defined it, wasn't growing anymore. That this new thing called social had caught on about 3 years earlier, hadn't really impacted our growth, but mobile, our big blind spot was the iPad and mobile gaming on your phones. And it turns out that's a very casual habit. And it turns out that is a substitute for what we were doing on the PC. And it turns out that the type of business model that works on those phones is not just buying games. And so what we had to do is figure out what we were really good at. We have a developer network of 500 developers. We have 40 developers ranging from 13 people to 300 people, where 100% of what they do when they get up in the morning is build games for Big Fish Games. So how do we leverage our assets, our customer base, our employees, our process of launching 400 games a year, and how do we pivot, going through puberty again, how do we pivot our company to attack this new market that is casual, but it's a completely different type of product than we've ever made before. And we're midstream in that. We happen to have a top 5 grossing mobile game month over month for the last 3 months. That was due part to an acquisition and scaling. We have 5 games that are perpetually now in the top 100 grossing mobile games in the world. So we have pivoted, and now about 40% of our revenue in less than 18 months comes from mobile. And during that period, we managed to grow our company by over 40% during those 2 years, year and a half. So all that growth came from mobile. And we were able to take our assets, understand what we are really good at, and say, we're not a single focus company. Our single focus isn't growing, and we need to come to that realization, lean it out a bit, make it really profitable, and use those profits to fund what we think we're going to be really good at next. And next can be one or more things. In our case, it's several things. And we're doing well. But if we hadn't pivoted, we'd be about down 15% year over year today. Today, we're up 20% year over year. Thanks to kind of understanding that focus is important, but sometimes you have to lift your head up and reinvent yourself. And that's what we've done successfully. And you'll see a lot of press releases about our conquest in mobile. We had a day on Memorial Day where one game made $500,000 in one day. That was our best day ever for a single product. And mobile is more of a hits-driven business, but we've pivoted to be a hits-driven company, and we have a huge developer network with a lot of at-bats, and we're betting on that. And they love us because they're there because we grew with them over the last decade. And so that's our assets. So, right on time, 0 minutes left. The flashcard guy who's giving me the countdown. Time's up. Do we have time for questions, or do you want to just move on? 2 questions. Who are the lucky questions? You all have this thing nailed. You're going to grow your company to $250 million. One question.
I guess I'll just. Hello? Since you say you've cornered the market on casual games, what plans do you have to go public, and what market conditions are you looking for?
So we cornered the casual games market. As I mentioned, unfortunately, the market that we cornered isn't really growing, and that's not really we had high aspirations. We had an S1 put together, and then we realized that the world was changing, and the world was changing for Zynga, and they went public, and I would not want to be Mark Pincus right now. That has been a tough year and a half for them. We don't have plans to go public yet. We're pivoting. We have a lot of growth coming from brand new segments of our business. We're not looking for capital today. We are cash flow positive and profitable, but that. There's a lot of decisions in the tree ahead that I'm going to have to turn right or turn left, and hopefully I'll make the right decisions, and that could be one of those decisions. So that's a non-answer.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so there are a lot of people here fundraising. You didn't do that for a long time. So do you think you would have been as successful if you took money early on?
Yeah, the one time when I say that I was actually least successful was when I had money. when I raised money because I had a plan of how to use it that wasn't based on actual real life experiences and data. And one of the benefits I had was that when I did raise money, I didn't need it. So I kind of scraped and clawed, and our industry was fortunately one where you didn't need a lot of capital to get off the ground. That's not true for every industry, but I would not have been as successful if I hadn't had that hardcore focus on, we're an introvert market. How do you grow an introvert market? You got to buy your customers. It's not viral, and so we had a perfect set of data that we established when we were a 5-person company that still scales today at 700 people.
Thank you, Paul. And here's Manifesto wine, and Paul will be here for the night.